This town is a lonely town, not the only town like this town. This town is a make.
Welcome once again to Issue Forum, and today we have Tom Carey as our guest. Tom Carey is well known in Chicago politics as the strategist behind John Stroger, as well as Richard M. Daley, Dick Devine, and many, many other politicos that you see in Chicago politics. Today we want to have a little bit of a focus on a show in memoriam out of John Stroger, the former Cook County Board president who deceased recently. And Tom, you were a friend of his.
Yes.
And in fact, Tom, I think that's where I first met you. In 1993, we used to meet at the real estate office of now, I guess he's in some trouble, but Tony Resco.
Right.
And you were running the meetings, and Augie Salas had brought me with the Hispanic contingent behind Stroger. And Andrea Brandt was the press person.
Right.
And I think it was Orlando Jones, and there was a doctor, and Gerald Nichols, and then some others. But it was a very small meeting, and I was a very young man. I think it was 22, 23, was in that meeting, and I worked with you, and you were very kind to me. And you ran the Stroger campaign. At that time, he was a Cook County commissioner of the district on the south side, and the 8th Ward Democratic Committeeman. And a lot of people thought that he wasn't going to win.
That was the general consensus.
Yes. That Aurelia Paczynski was supported by Dick Mell, by Mike Madigan, by Bill Lipinski, by many of the powerhouses, even some of the Hispanics. That she had a ton of jobs that she could dole out, and that at that time there's still more overt patronage than there is today. And that she had a good name. Her father had run for U.S. Senate, albeit lost, but his name was out there. Had run for mayor of the city of Chicago, and got a sizable vote in the late 70s, and there's a sizable Polish population. Was that the first time you had worked for John Stroger?
Yes.
In 93?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
And how did you, that's where I met you, but how did you get to know John Stroger?
Well, the thing with John was that I was actually basically drafted for the job. I didn't apply for the job.
Yes.
And through the years, I'd seen John, through City Hall, through a couple of social occasions and luncheons, and we were never really introduced, but he knew my face. And every time I see him, I'd say, "Hi, Commissioner," and he'd say, "Hi, buddy, how you doing?" And then, but how it turned out, he knew my name. He didn't know he didn't put the name and the face together. Mm-hmm. He knew my name. So when it was suggested that he talked to me, and he said, "Well, let's Tom Carey talk to me?" And they said, "Yeah, well, we're friends. We'll send him up to see you." So when I went to his office and see him, he bust out laughing. It was the two came together. So and we talked for quite a while. And he told me later the biggest reason I got hired was all the people who came and talked to him told me he couldn't win. These are the people who wanted to work for him, and I was the only one going gung ho. Here's how you do it, and boom, 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 boom. And he said he told his assistant, years later, I go, "There's my man," So so in the beginning it was tough. It was tough because of that consensus that we had no chance.
Because he was black, number one.
Black, right?
And that the racism or the white voters wouldn't go for a countywide candidate.
And he was not well known. He was an inside player. He was not a Harold Washington type speaker, charisma, that sort of thing.
He was never a great speaker.
Right. He basically they saw him as a ward healer. Government guy with a lot of jobs through the county, minor jobs, that sort of thing. They did not see him as a general election candidate.
Well, I remember I spoke to Roman Paczynski, and there's no doubt he supported his daughter. He loved his daughter. He supported her even when she became a Republican, although I don't think he necessarily was thrilled with it. But Roman also told me that from a behind-the-scenes deal maker, that there was very few people better than Stroger, and that Stroger had earned his stripes, that he had been loyal to the machine or the regular Democratic organization. And that was Roman Paczynski, the father of the candidate, had told me that. And, even though he was inarticulate, so some people may not think intelligent, Tony Parika, the Republican Cook County Commissioner, ostensibly his arch enemy for many of those years in the Republican, he was running for that office eventually against his son, not against John Stroger, but it would have been against John Stroger. Parica said never to underestimate John Stroger because some people thought he was dumb. He said he was intelligent and had an incredible grasp of county government, and this was his arch enemy, so politically at any rate. Tony Parica said this about him.
Right. So John, when in 1990, when Richard Phelan was elected, and he tried to restructure the county board into his, to his favor, to his fiefdom, it was John Stroger who organized the opposition to him and stopped it. John remained as finance chairman, and basically everything was status quo, and that really surprised Phelan at the time. They later grew to be allies, and or at least had a good relationship, but they really underestimated John then. And it goes back also. John Stroger should have been the candidate in 1990. That was a travesty. This was after Mayor Daley took office in '89.
Ed Leckwitz was the slated candidate.
Yeah. Ted Leckwitz was the most prized guy in the room when he got slated. He wanted to be slated for Cook County clerk, and they had no candidate, basically, nobody they could agree on for Cook County Board President. They did not want Phelan, okay, and they did not want George Dunn, especially did not want Cusper. So there was an awful mess there. So Leckwitz,
Stanley Cusper ran another Polish candidate.
Yeah, right.
And then Dick Phelan ran.
Right. And so they were
Richard Phelan.
Right. They were trying to find a candidate who could beat Phelan. So they came with the idea that Leckwitz could, which was really, was very. I liked Ted Leckwitz. It was very a poor choice, and they didn't even consider John Stroger when traditionally the judicial, the finance committee chairman would follow through and become the next president. Stroger was a perfect candidate. Daley just got elected mayor. He had to hold on, do anything to get Stroger in there, to get a black man in there, not to be able to black man rejected. Daley was up for re-election in '91. Daley would have fought hard. He would have fought 20 times harder for Stroger than he did in '94 against Paczynski. So that was a terrible, terrible mistake. John Stroger should have gotten the nomination then, but what happened, happened. In '94, there was a very close vote for slate making in the Cook County Central Committee, and Paczynski had an awful lot of support, and Stroger was able to eke by. But again, among blacks, they felt John was not strong in their wars. He was not well known, and the polls showed that. And
he did not support Harold Wash in '83. He supported Richard M. Daley for mayor. I think the only black committeeman who supported Daley.
Right, he was. Well, the story behind that was that he went to Harold in '82 and asked him if he was running for mayor. And Harold said, "I don't know." And Daley went to Stroger and asked for his help. And he was going to run, and he asked for his help. And Stroger said yes. So when Harold came back in late '82 and said he was going to run, Harold said, "I already gave my word." And that was Harold came from the old school. So a couple of guys who were very influential in the Washington campaign, finance guys, who were also very close friends of John Stroger. The two of them and Stroger and one Saturday, and they all tried to talk John into switching and supporting Harold. After about 10 or 15 minutes, Harold says, let's stop this nonsense. Let's stop it. He goes, "We're not going to change this fellow's mind. Let's have a nice lunch." And that's it, and they ate lunch, and they went their own way.
Although subsequently John Stroger did become close to Harold, certainly supported him in '87.
Yeah, but then, in the '83 election, the general election, when everybody was clamoring to be in control of the street money, which was a lot of money, a lot in the black community.
Right.
And all these ward committee men or the state reps, whatever, everyone to be in charge. Who did Harold select? John Stroger. He gave it right to him. He knew John, And when John Stroger lost to Harold Washington just before that in the 1980 primary for Congress, it was a four-man race, and John ran, and Harold got about 50% of the vote, and the other three split up to 50. And Harold's headquarters was about 2 blocks away from John's. Well, during the party or the celebration, whatever, John Stroger walked in and walked right up to the podium. And Harold Washington introduced him. He said, "If I knew if you would ask me one guy who would come over and congratulate me, I would have told you John Stroger."
So, as a positive retrospective, he was a very classy man.
Yeah.
He seemed like he was very loyal to his friends and family. And that one thing he said when the Forrest Claypool commissioner was criticizing him on patronage, which no doubt existed. But he said that patronage in some of the Eighth Ward was code word for minorities. And I talked to a lawyer who told me that the middle-class African-Americans loved John Stroger because he brought so many middle-class African-Americans into government.
Right. And just like through history, every ethnic group has done it. The Irish have done it. The Eastern Europeans back when Cermak was around. It's just a tradition. It's the way people start. I mean, they don't. Their future generations don't stay in government. They're out in private industry. But this is starting.
Now, one other thing he was very proud of that he ran on, and Joe Morris ran against him on. And I thought Joe Morris is a gentleman.
Yeah.
He's a very intelligent man, a good lawyer, Republican, very conservative. Was the hospital, and that a Republican or libertarian viewpoint is that perhaps health care should be privatized or even for the poor given vouchers, but that John Stroger felt there should be a centralized public hospital, health care for the indigent, the low income who do not have insurance, but a publicly run institution, and that was one of his cornerstones. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think as far as Stroger is concerned with the hospital,
yes,
that will go down as his legacy.
Okay.
That will go down as that he took an outmoded hospital, which was basically breaking down. I mean, really breaking down, and was not functioning well. And he built this brand new, got the money, and the money's hard to get, and built this beautiful hospital.
Now, within a very short period of time, you had both Cook County Board President, or former Cook County Board President, the Honorable John Stroger, die, and you also had Eugene Sawyer die.
Yes, yes.
And you also knew Eugene Sawyer, who was mayor appointed and then less than a term. Right. And you were involved with the daily campaign against Eugene Sawyer.
Right.
So you were on opposite sides, but what were your impressions of Gene Sawyer?
Just basically what everybody said about him. He was just a nice man, a good man. From a political point of view, Gene just could not cope with the idea of leadership. You know, when you have the position of leadership, you have to lead. You have to do things, and some of these things or make an omelet, you got to crack a few heads.
Right. And
those things are leaving his enemies, avowed enemies, and positions of power, was a disaster for him. And then not reaching out more into the white community, into the white politicians. They wanted to go with him.
Right. Now, Dick Mell, alderman of the 33rd Ward, said he was an absolute gentleman, one of his best friends.
Yeah.
And I talked to Monroe Anderson about Eugene Sawyer, and he said, again, he was a gentleman, he was a kind man. But I remember the Steve Coakley thing came up.
Yeah.
And I think that was the time that the Daily Camp, which you were a part of, got, I think it was Jeremiah Joyce, your brother-in-law, got, was it Saul Bellow or one of the Jewish authors, or I don't know if it was Saul Alinsky, but one of them to endorse him because Steve Coakley was involved with the Nation of Islam.
Right.
And made anti-Semitic statements. But what's interesting, Monroe Anderson, who worked with Eugene Sawyer, told me that he advised him to fire Steve Coakley, and he said, "Oh, we know Steve's crazy. We know he's saying, but he has a family, he has kids.
Right.
I don't want to fire him." Where most politicians would have had to fire him because of those.
Right.
I think Coakley said that the white community created AIDS, and I think it was Saul Bellow, Jeremiah Joyce got Saul Bellow, and he endorsed him, and that was a big shift in terms of the lakefront and the Jewish community who was with Harold Washington to go with Rich Daley.
See, he did not have the advisors around him. He did not have the political acumen. And if he wanted to take care of the guy's family, fire him and get him something on the side and the outside, down the line.
Right.
And he just didn't. He didn't have that around him. He did not have real strong political advisors. He had strong governmental advisors like Erwin France. But they weren't people who were going to go out and get votes for him. Yeah. Gene could have put that thing together, but he did not know how to exercise leadership. And it was very obvious from the beginning.
Now, we only have a little bit of time, and we're definitely doing some more shows with you and others, such as Monroe Anderson or Larry Horse, some of the old guard. Old war horses who helped on these different campaigns. But how did you get involved in politics?
Same way I got involved in baseball, basketball, just a natural inclination.
Okay.
I recall when I was 6 years old, I recall bits of the Kennedy-Nixon thing. I remember in the morning of the morning after the election, knowing that Kennedy had won. Little clips like that, and kind of kept on growing. My first campaign in 1968, the summer of '68, I just turned 14, or I was going to turn 14. And I went downtown and worked as a volunteer for the Gene McCarthy campaign for president. And it was a lot of fun. And then things were much more political.
And those were when you had the torchlight parades with Richard J. Daley.
Right, yeah. So things were much more active back then, believe it or not.
But your old neighborhood actually had quite a few Republicans.
Oh,
Even
sure.
that one gentleman, I think, who got indicted in the George Ryan scandal was the state senator that
Swanson.
that Tom Hines beat.
Right, exactly.
Swanson, right.
Yeah. Sure, there was a lot of Republicans.
You had more Scandinavians than you had Irish Catholic.
Right, sure. Oh, absolutely. So, there was politics was much more. I remember in high school, maybe not as freshman.
So where did you go to high school?
Marist.
Marist.
I started high school the week after the Democratic Convention, so you can know what the times were like. And but that's not so much freshmen. Sophomores, juniors, and seniors, especially juniors and seniors, everybody wore a button. Whether for Nixon or Wallace or Humphrey. I mean, the majority were for Wallace. This is a Catholic school, had to freak out.
Was some of that race?
Oh, I suppose so, but it's a Catholic school on the southwest side of Chicago, predominantly Irish, or at least a lot of Irish. Had to freak out the brothers from Marist. They were from New York, liberal and stuff like that, and they just totally freak them out. But people were active, wore buttons. They don't do that nowadays.
Now, we don't have a lot of time, but we're definitely doing more shows. As we close, just tell us, what was the best campaign you worked on?
1980, Richard Daley State's Attorney, the most important campaign of the last half century.
Okay. And a lot of people, I talked to a former state representative, Jim Phelan, from Lipinski's organization. He said, but for Tom Carey, that Rich Daley would not be the state's attorney.
Well, a lot of people work in the campaign. There were a lot of people working in the campaign. A lot of people put their hearts and souls in it. It was a fun campaign because no one thought we could win. Our backs were against the wall.
It was a groundbreaking campaign because if he wouldn't have won state's attorney, he might not be mayor today. He wouldn't be mayor today.
He'd be selling insurance on houses.
So, all right. Well, Tom Carey, thank you very much for being on our show. We're going to do some more shows. Goodbye. God bless.
Is a make you town or a break you town.